Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for joining us on this GCSE options remote presentation, which is slightly different from the norm, in truth, in terms of what we normally do. The rationale here, in terms of it being a remote presentation, is that really it's a shorter and simpler presentation than we've ever had before because of some of the changes that we've made to our curriculum over the past couple of years. It used to be quite complex. There used to be a lot that needed explaining, and it always seemed better to explain that verbally rather than in writing. But actually what we've done to our options process over the past year, 2 years, is simplify it so that some of the potentially complicated things that needed some rationalization, that doesn't need to happen anymore. So I'm hoping that I'm going to aim for 30 minutes, but I won't, because it's me, and it's probably going to be close to 40 minutes. But in the past, it was anything around an hour. And on this occasion, it seems silly to bring you into school. You all make those journeys in your cars, park up in school, come in, listen to me, only to then shoot off home again, particularly when, in the vast majority of cases, you'll be coming in next week anyway to see us at open evening, not open evening, parents' evening, and we'll all be there. I'll be there, and as will lots of other senior leaders, head of year, assistant head of year, and all of the teachers as well. So just a couple of housekeeping things. If you, I don't even know if you can unmute, but please don't unmute for now, just because we know what we all know, because of what happened during the pandemic, of how badly Zoom and Teams calls can go if people start unmuting left, right, and centre. If you have any questions throughout, and hopefully the kind of big generic questions I'll be able to resolve during the course of the next half an hour, 40 minutes. But if you have any questions, just throw them in the chat. And sitting in the background is Mr. Williams. And he will do his best to answer any generic questions that you might have. Hopefully I'll box them off, but if not, he's there just in case I miss anything or anything gets a little confusing. And it shouldn't, it should be straightforward. Mr. Williams is part of our senior leadership team, and he's the guy who will write this timetable. He's the guy who will take children through the process of choosing their options, and he's the one who will then make it work, and he will make it work. He always does make it work. But it's an extraordinarily difficult task, making a school timetable work, and it begins with the year 9s, which I'll talk you through in a second. If when you do put anything in the chat, if you could avoid putting anything personal about your own child, just because obviously it then has the eyes of everybody on it. So anything that is personal to your individual child, just save that for next week, or feel free to email us. And equally, if your child is sitting there with you now, feel free to send them to do the washing up or fold the laundry, watch some Ben and Holly, whatever they want to do, because they're going to get this from me on Friday. So there's no point really them sitting there and going through it twice, unless you want to have a conversation with them immediately on the back of this presentation. That might be quite useful, I guess. So about 30-40 minutes, and then if you're mad, you can go watch Everton play Arsenal, or Liverpool play Wolves. Okay, the plans tonight, and as I said, the children will get this on an abridged version, or a slightly different version of this. The aims tonight, very briefly, is to just help you support your child through this options process. And they need a lot more support with the historic system than they need now. It's a fairly straightforward system, so it's not too complicated, but they've got some thinking to do, and we just want to put you in a position where you can best support them. To reassure you that your child choosing the right options is important to us. Believe me when I say that we do not want children in year 10 and 11 sitting doing the wrong subjects. That's not good for anybody. And we don't want to be having those conversations in September, October, where children turn around to us and say, I just feel like I've made the wrong choices. Occasionally that will happen, because children change, and we get that. But it's in our best interest not to have children sitting in rooms doing subjects that, in truth, they never wanted to do. So it's in everybody's best interest for them to make the right decision. So it's important to us, because we have to take them through this. We have to teach them. I'm going to try and give you a general understanding of the structure and the makeup of our Key Stage 3 curriculum, which, like I say, is very simple now, so nothing to be concerned about. I'll take you through, and there's none of this is rocket science, why pupils should and shouldn't make an option choice, and what the pitfalls are in terms of what we usually see students doing, which they shouldn't do. And I'll talk you through, and if you've had a child that's gone through the school in the last couple of years, this won't be new to you, but I'll talk you through some of the changes that have happened in recent years with GCSEs and other qualifications. In particular, if you have had a child that maybe left school 5 years ago, 6 years ago, things are different now. And again, many of you will be aware of this, but if you're not, I'll take you through, and you'll have to forgive me. What I would say is that, going back to Mr. Williams and the writing of the timetable, everything pivots on year 9. It really does. Every decision that they make has an impact on what we do in terms of writing that timetable for September. And Mr. Williams, when he gets the options forms in later this term, he will begin immediately the work on writing that timetable. And it begins with year 9. It doesn't begin with year 10 as they move into 11, or year 11 moving into sixth form. It starts with year 9 because that is the fundamental unknown. We know what year 10 are going to be doing when they hit year 11, and we've got a reasonable idea as to what year 11 might want to do when they go into year 12. But year 9 is full of unknowns. And as an example, this is never going to happen, but if every child in year 9 chose sociology as a GCSE option going into year 10, or even if half of them chose sociology, and it gets big numbers, but it doesn't get half. If they did, we'd have a problem. Because we wouldn't be able to staff that. So if that's why we do it at this time of year. It means that we can start staffing some of these subjects in readiness for September, and that doesn't happen overnight. That recruitment process needs to start now. So yeah, it's critical that we get a sensible set of options done and put in place by the end of this term, so that we know what we're working towards for September. And that's the goal. I always say that we are looking at working towards creating well-rounded, good people who are ready for the real world and these complicated challenges that the world presents to them. But there is no getting away from the fact that, and if we were doing this in person now in Quarry Hall, I'd be exemplifying this and pointing to the table where they normally get the results. There's no getting away from the fact that in 2 years' time they'll be nearly at exams and they'll be working towards that results day. And it's just about placing them in the best position possible, having made the right choices now about the subjects that they're going to be picking up grades in those envelopes in 2 and a bit years' time. Okay, just a few kind of logistical things. Later this week, and in fact it could well be online now, you'll get access, and your sons and daughters will get access to the year 9 options booklet. And to be fair, that booklet will contain some of the information that I'm covering here. But in some cases it will contain a lot more information, particularly on the individual subjects. We've tried to keep it as concise as possible. And by concise, I mean when you get to subjects like geography and history and French and sociology, child development, business studies, what we've told those departments to do is to keep the summary of their subjects to less than 1 page. That's not to say that there aren't links on there that can take you to more information, and you can click to your heart's content and follow those hyperlinks to further information. But that options booklet is your starting point. We're not suggesting to children that they should read every page of it. If a child is absolutely determined never to study history again or never to study computing again, then they don't need to read about computing, and they don't need to read about history. But what we would say is use that as the basis of the choices that they are making moving forward, because it contains the most fundamental information about why you might study this subject, what the structure and the content of the subject is like, what it might lead to, how it's assessed, what it might be useful for in terms of careers. So it contains some very basic information in that regard that is then the launch pad for the children to do some more thinking about their options. And as I say, because we know that this is for an audience of both parents and children, and we know that children like things on one piece of A4 paper, we've tried to keep it quite concise when they reach those subject pages. So that's the booklet. They'll get that later this week. It'll be online, it'll be on the website as well. So whenever it goes live, you'll be able to see it at some point this week. These are the dates. You don't need to note these down. They're in the options booklet, so you'll be able to see them there. So here we are now, options presentation to parents. Sorry, just give me 1 second. Hello? Right, no worries. 1 second. That was Mr. Williams telling me that my presentation isn't moving through. Not sure why that is. Mr. Williams, give me a little thumbs up there, or a WhatsApp message to let me know if you can see at least that. Right, grand. Apparently you can see that. What you couldn't see was that. I'm gonna have to be creative here. So they're the aims, they're the objectives. You haven't missed much so far. And that's the Year 9 options booklet, which I was making reference to then. Apologies, I'm not sure why my presentation isn't flowing through. So you've seen the option booklet and the important dates you can see in front of you there. Again, all of these in the options booklet. Try and make it a bit bigger for you. We're here now at March the 1st. You'll get access to that options booklet. It should be available on the website. It says week beginning March the 3rd there, but I'll take that out now. So on March the 3rd, which is Friday, I'm going to meet with the students, Friday period 5. I'm going to show them the options booklet. I'm going to talk them through a slightly different variation on this presentation, a bit more student friendly, and give them a bit more information that perhaps they need that you don't need. Next week on March the 7th, which is the Tuesday, we've got Year 9 Parents Evening. And that's a slightly different parents' evening, I guess, from the ones that you've had in the past, where really you're going to that parents' evening and you're just receiving a report on how your child is doing and where they're up to and how they might be better. That's an opportunity for you to ask some questions about subjects. So really kind of to dig into history and geography and French and Spanish and ask the question, is this suitable for my child? I think the one caveat I would say, the one health warning I would say with that is that the teachers want to grow the subjects. They want everybody to do their subjects. And there's always that every year there's that battle between history and geography to see who's going to get the most students that year, because they're always, the humanities subjects are always vying against each other. So they're very keen, and I guess you've got to see through that a little bit and ask the right questions to make sure that you're getting the right answers as to whether it's suitable for your child. And I guess when you look in the options booklet and when you ask the questions at parents' evening, you're asking about the content of the subject. So if I take history as an example, there are lots of students who will have studied lots of topics that have been really interesting to them over the past couple of years, but equally there'll be elements of the history curriculum that they've studied that perhaps has not floated their boat. And it's asking those questions, engaging that from the options booklet. To what extent is this the history that I like to study? To what extent in geography, for instance, is it human geography or physical geography? And what's my preference as a child? Because what you don't want to do is get to GCSE as a 13, 14-year-old child, start a course and you think it's going to be the wholeness of history, because history is enormous, isn't it? And then they get there and they realize it's just Nazi Germany and the Russian Revolution and nothing else. It isn't. But can you imagine if they got there thinking that it was going to be about the Tudors, or it was going to be about Greek history, or it was going to be about all sorts of different eras of history, and they get there and actually it's just about Victorian England and Elizabethan England. So it's understanding what it is about that subject that floats their boat, and then just making sure that that is a part of the GCSE curriculum when they get there. March the 28th is the point at which the options choices and the form needs to be completed. It's all online. It used to be on paper, and you used to pull up in the car park on a morning in the car and the kids would be shoving it through your window of the car. But everything now is online. So the options booklet and the information you'll get on the back of this presentation will guide you as to how you access that form online and how it is that you then complete it. And I'll show you an example of the options form then. So there actually isn't a great deal of time. It's like 4 weeks until the point at which we get those choices in. We then finish for Easter a few days later. So that just gives us a few days before Easter to chase up the last few forms, because there will be some. There's always some, no matter what we say to them. There's always somebody who doesn't get it in and get it submitted by that point. So we'll chase them up before Easter, and then we'll come back after Easter, and we'll begin a series of discussions with some, but not all, students about how appropriate and feasible the option choices are that they've selected. And we will not, and you have my word on this, we will not turn around and say to any child, you cannot do that, unless it just doesn't work, in which case that's a different problem, but that's rare. The combination of options that they've chosen, but we will not say you can't do that because, for instance, you've been poorly behaved in that subject, or you can't do that because you've been a little bit lazy and your attitude to learning hasn't been good, or you're not going to do that because we don't think you're strong enough academically to do that. We will not do that. It's not a part of what we do. But the conversations will be about, with some children who perhaps have chosen an odd combination. Maybe they've chosen, I'll come on to this a little later, iMedia and computing. It's a little bit odd. They're kind of very close to each other. Maybe they've chosen just a combination of subjects, maybe art and photography. There's nothing wrong with that, they go together, but it's just checking with the students that they know what they're doing, that they've chosen the right subjects. We might also go to some students and say to them, are you sure? Because you've been telling us for the last 3 years you bloody hate this. You've been telling us you hate French, or you hate geography, or you hate computing, and now you're telling us you're going to do it next year. What's all that about? And if they say that I want to do it, I want to stick to my guns, that's absolutely fine. But we just do that due diligence to make sure that they're checking, they're making the choices for the right reasons. And then by May the 26th, which is around the half-term break, we'll confirm those option choices for to the students. And I think I'm saying 99%, it's probably 100% of children get their option choices in truth in most years. This is the odd year when we don't, so I'll come to that later. Let's clarify a few things now. And these are the things which might be teaching grandma to suck eggs a little bit, maybe a little patronizing for those of you who've been through the system in the past. So if you have been through GCSEs yourself, a long time ago in my case, or if you've had children or other relatives, family members, friends who've been through GCSE courses, then you may have gone through what was called a modular course. So as an example of that, the GCSE that I taught when I first started teaching of English was very much modular. You would do coursework at particular points, you would do units at particular points during the course of year 10 and 11, and then all of those marks would be added up. And although you would still do some exams at the end of the 2 years, you would be able to bank some of your marks and some of your grades. And that isn't the case in the vast majority of subjects anymore. So in 95% of qualifications, all the exams take place at the end of the GCSE courses. There are some qualifications where that isn't the case, and I won't go into the detail of that now because it's in the options booklet. But it's worth saying, just in case you're expecting a modular approach where, I mean, there's some logic in it, isn't there? The idea of I've just studied something, assess me on it, study something else, assess me on it, that makes sense. If you're expecting a modular approach, they are just a thing of the past, and it is worth in that mind and that like considering the number of exams that students could face when they reach the end. And I've just exemplified that here in that I've taken a typical child who studies English language and literature, maths, and the combined sciences, which I'll talk you through in a second, and then a range of other GCSEs. And at the end, I mean, it's cruel. It's quite frankly cruel. Within a 6-week period of time, they'll study 28. They'll take 28 exams, and that's, I mean, there's no getting away from the fact that they're going to be examined, and it is a bizarre system. It really is. And I think if you had a blank canvas and could invent education from scratch, I don't think anyone would think that this is a good idea. But that's what we've got. That's the deck of cards we've been dealt. So it may be worth looking if your child is somebody perhaps who you don't think will deal with exams particularly well. It might be worth looking at the number of exams per course. It might be worth looking at the practical elements in some courses that they might have, which I'll come on to in a second. That might mean that there are fewer exams towards the end of the course, because 28 exams in a 6-week period of time is crackers. And I remember when I was at school, and some of you might remember this, my English, and maybe this is why I did so well in English, because I didn't do well in everything. My English course was 100% coursework. There was no exam at the end of it, from what I remember. Whilst I'm on that subject, again, traditionally there was this thing called coursework. Now, coursework does still exist to a degree, but very few subjects have that traditional coursework element that many of you might remember from a bygone age. And certainly if you had children who went through the school 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago, there was a very heavy coursework element. That morphed into something else called controlled assessment. And that meant, because we were getting to the point at which, quite frankly, children were cheating and plagiarizing work from the internet and passing it off as their coursework, all schools moved to a model of controlled assessment where the coursework, as it was now being branded, was done in the classroom with a level of control where the teacher could see it being done so that they knew there was no level of plagiarism. But even that has now largely gone. So again, when you read through the options booklet, it's worth looking at where there are elements of coursework in a course, because some children thrive on coursework and really give it their full attention over a long period of time and are far more accomplished at that than they are in exams. And some students, it always surprises me, despise the idea of coursework. They just want to sit in an exam room and have that terminal exam in that regard. So it's worth thinking about that as you go through the options booklet and you tally up the number of subjects that your child is doing. So the courses that your children will study were new, brand new. It seems like a long time ago now, in September 2016. But again, if you had a child who went through the system before then, very different set of GCSEs. Some other subjects followed in 2017, and the last set of subjects, and with the content that they now have, started in September 18. So if you think about the impact that COVID had and the fact that exams didn't happen for a couple of years, actually, there are some qualifications that have only just gone through a full examination series, that have only just in 2021-22 reached the point at which they've gone through the system once. So the specifications are relatively new. The materials are developing as we teach them. And the reason I mention that is because I think it is worth parents understanding that these qualifications are harder than they have ever been. When we, as a profession, saw that the content that was being crammed into those GCSE courses and the other qualifications, and the coverage that we had to get through, and the level of assessment that was required for some of these courses, there is greater rigor, and they are just, the headline is, they are harder. Now, that's not to say that the children will perform more poorly, but the level of challenge for the children over time will be tough, and they do have to get their heads down from day one. You probably all know about this, but I'll say it anyway. There've been some significant changes to GCSE grading, so we still occasionally slip into the old mistakes of calling them A stars and A's and B's, mainly because it still exists in sixth form at A level. But yeah, they changed from a system of alphabeticizing grades to go for numerical grades, and I guess that took some getting used to. And the comparison I always use it must have been like when we went from shillings and half pennies and things like that. Decimalisation went through the process of moving to pounds and pence in the way that we have now. It must have been quite a difficult change to go through. Obviously, that's on a global scale, a national scale, sorry. Whereas this is just on a school by school basis. But that did take some getting used to. So although there is no clear comparison to what, let's say, a C now looks like on that new system, if you use that, and that's a very commonly available infographic, if you use that as your general guide, so it used to be the case that the threshold was a C, employers wanted a C, colleges, further education organisations really wanted a C in most cases. Many subjects might have asked for a B to do it at A level. So you're looking at a C grade as being around a 4 or a 5, and a B grade of being around a 5 or a 6. So you can use that kind of sliding scale to understand how that new conversion to GCSE works. It isn't absolutely like that, because in the same breath I'm telling you the GCSEs have got tougher as well. But broadly, that's a pretty decent comparison to use. So if you're not used to that, we kind of now need to slip into the language of numbers rather than grades. Okay, so these are the subjects. Again, straightforward. These are the ones that children have to study. There are lots of asterisks on the slides that follow. Bear with me. I will talk you through them strategically. So the first subject that they have to study is English. That leads to 2 qualifications, and this is, as an English teacher, infuriating to describe to children, because on the timetable they just see English, and they don't realise that when they go to English, in any given lesson they could be studying English language, and in another lesson later that week they could be studying literature. And it leads to 2 totally separate qualifications, as separate from each other as geography and history. And we obviously make it clear when we begin teaching them, but they forget and they think it's just English, leading to 1 qualification. So there's 2 GCSEs in the bank for everybody, because they have to study English Lit and English language. The third is maths. Everybody has to do maths. It's a national curriculum requirement, so there's no escaping that, and nor should there be. Students will have the third qualification in the bank there. Gets a little complicated for science, and I always kind of take a deep breath when I get to science, so apologies here. The vast majority of children will take what I would have called in my day when I did it dual science or double science or combined science. It's had a whole number of names over the years. I'm not going to tell you what it's called now because it's even more complicated, but basically think about it as double science. And that leads to 2 GCSEs. So when I was at school, I got 2 C's in the sciences. I studied biology, chemistry, and maths. Biology, chemistry, and physics as part of that double qualification. So I did exactly what the national curriculum tells me I should do in physics, chemistry, and biology, but it just led to 2 qualifications. It led to 2 GCSEs in the sciences. However, some children might be science fanatics and they might be really keenly interested in science, and they can choose to specialize in chemistry, physics, and biology as separate subjects. That means they get more time in each of those subjects and they get 3 GCSEs at the end of it. There is an impact from taking 3 GCSEs in science, which I'll come to a little bit later. And again, it's all in the options booklet. But I would say in any given year, you're looking about 160, 170 children will do double science. And then the other 80-ish students might do triple science, so the 3 separate sciences. Little caveat there, little explanation. If a child wishes to study the sciences at A level, makes no difference whether they study double science or the separate sciences. If a child wanted to come and study physics at our school, for instance, at A level, as long as they meet the entry requirements in either the double science qualification or in triple science, then it wouldn't make any difference to us. They've reached the level of competency that they need to study science. Come back to the science again a little bit later. Religious studies, every child has to study religious studies. It's a bit of a strange one, particularly in a school that doesn't have any religious, traditional, common religious character. But the national curriculum says that we have to teach them religious studies. For next year, so it used to be the case that every child would have 1 lesson of RS in year 10 and 1 lesson of RS in year 11. We've removed that to a degree now, and what will happen instead is every child will have 1 lesson of RS in year 10, but we'll cover it all. We'll get complete curriculum coverage in year 10, and they won't study it in year 11. We'll complete it in year 10 so that they can then concentrate on the qualifications. They don't get a qualification in RS. That's just compulsory study. It's part of the national curriculum. It's a government requirement that we have that coverage within there. However, they can choose to study RS as a separate GCSE, which means again they get more lessons in it, and they get a qualification in it as well. But I'll come to that a little bit later. PE, every child has to do PE at year 10 and year 11. They'll do more in year 11 than they will in year 10. It's slightly imbalanced over the 2 years, but the best way of thinking about that is every child has to do recreational PE, just going out and playing sport and keeping fit, and that's just compulsory. They don't get a qualification from it, but it's good for them, and it's good for them for physical health, and it's good for the mental health. But children can, if they wish, choose it as one of their options and specialise in PE and get a qualification from it, and that they'll see that in the suite of options. So that's what will be on their timetable. But at that point, they've got 2 in English, 1 in maths, and either 2 or 3 in sciences. So already they've got 3 or 5 or 6 GCSEs there. They are the optional subjects that we offer. I would say, and I always say this, I would describe it as a traditional suite of options. There's nothing mad there or completely out of the ordinary. We get good numbers in all of those subjects. I think the ones that you might look at and see as being a bit marginal, a bit peripheral, maybe GCSE photography, perhaps, but every year we'll get 20, 25 students-ish, maybe more, up to 30, doing GCSE photography, so it's good numbers. Again, a lot of asterisks there, which I'll mention in a second, but I get just a traditional suite of GCSE, largely GCSE options. What I would point out is you may be confused by this reference to CNC, Cambridge National Certificate, same with creative media here. There used to be another one, there isn't anymore. That is a rose by any other name. You can ignore that entirely. It will be explained in the options booklet. What it means is there is a slightly different approach to assessing those subjects than the one that I described before, which is exam at the end and nothing else but the exam at the end. So you'll find in child development and you'll find in creative media that there are just different models There is a slightly modular approach in those subjects. I've mentioned biology, chemistry, and physics as the separate sciences. That children can choose to take those as separate sciences, or they can choose to just do double science. And I've mentioned RS and I've mentioned PE, cited them on the previous one. Other than that, there will be staff at Parents' Evening next week that you should be able to speak to about each of these options. Yeah, fairly traditional, I would say. This is where the complication has gone. So I'm going to mention this just in case anybody's sitting there thinking, when's he going to mention pathways? And the answer is, other than this slide, I'm not. So we used to have a system where we would split students into pathway 1, pathway 2, and at one point there was actually a pathway 3 as well. That just doesn't exist anymore, and I won't be saying too much about that. It meant that children did different numbers of qualifications and had different amounts of time in each of those qualifications, and it's quite complex and it needed some rationalization. So just in case you're sitting there thinking, which pathway is my child going to be in, because my last child was in pathway 1 or pathway 2, that just doesn't exist anymore. And instead, every single child in the school, without exception, will start year 10 by studying the same number of qualifications, same amount of curriculum time, so that we've got that level of equity and ambition for every child across the school, regardless of how well they've done in year 7, 8, and 9. That is irrelevant to us to a degree. Okay, there are some limitations, but I think if you look at other schools, and I'm always very proud of this, and I used to be the Mr. Williams. I used to be the guy who would write the timetable, and it's like a Rubik's Cube with 1,000 sides, and we could make it easier for ourselves by blocking subjects. I'll explain what I mean by that in a second, but we don't. By and large, we let the children choose from a pretty open field of options, and you'll see that in the options form that I'll show you in a second. We do, however, ask them to choose 2, and I think 90% of schools are doing this now, or a variation on this, 2 of the following subjects. So 2 are French, Spanish, geography, or history. So they can choose any, they have to choose any 2 of those. So if they're real linguists, they might go for French and Spanish. If they're humanities, they might go for geography and history. They might go for a blend of the 2, Spanish and geography. I think something like, I'm making this number up to a degree now, but it will be a million miles off, something like 150 students in last year's year 9, the current year 10, are doing a language in some way. The others will have taken geography or history. So we've got big numbers in terms of language, and they are very successful subjects. Rationale behind that is that they are known as the facilitating subjects, the EBAC subjects, or the facilitating subjects, and they are being given greater credibility by further education institutions and universities, and it's felt that students who study those subjects will have greater merit and credibility. So we're trying to encourage as many students as we can to take those subjects, and it's also a staffing issue as well to a degree. There's no way we could cope with 250 students doing child development next year, and only 7 children doing geography. That would never happen, because usually we get 150 children doing geography, but we wouldn't know what to do with our geography teachers and our history teachers if there's got to be some playing field that we're working within, some parameters that we're working in. Otherwise, we just don't block them. So I remember choosing my options in school. There was an A block, B block, C block, D block, and you chose 1 from each block. And sometimes you would choose something from A block, and it would be up against another subject, and it meant that you couldn't. That other subject wasn't in another block, so it meant that you couldn't do a certain combination of subjects. We don't do that. We just give them the list and we say, choose your subjects, and then we'll create the blocks afterwards. Believe me, it would make Mr. Williams' life easier if he could just put them into the blocks now and say to the kids, you have to choose 1 from each block. But we don't do that. We just say, go ahead, you tell us what you want to do, and then we'll make it work. It's a nightmare, but he does it every year, and he's better at it than I ever was. He just makes it work. I think I've already covered the annual double versus triple science confusion. It just comes up every single year. What I would say about that is, if a child does choose to specialize in the sciences and takes triple science, because they need more time in the sciences, it essentially eats up one of their other choices. This will all make sense when I show you the options form shortly. So yeah, there's just that understanding that if my child is going to do more science, then they'll have to do less of something else. So it just eats up an option choice for them. Probably easier if I show you. Oh, sorry, I didn't do that. Religious studies already mentioned. Every child will do it, but won't necessarily do a qualification. And PE, every child will do it. They won't necessarily do a qualification. So they need to make sure if they want to specialise in those subjects that they need to, that they press it on the options form. Don't worry if you can't see that really clearly. You're going to get access to it in the next day or so, and it'll be in the options booklet. So that's the form that you'll get. It'll be an online form. It will ask you to choose 2 of those. And if you can't see those, that's French, geography, Spanish, and history. So 2 of the EBAC subjects. And then it'll ask them to choose 2 of any of the others. So 2 of those and 2 of those. If they choose triple science because they want to specialize in the sciences, they hit that one there, and then it just leaves them with one other option in truth, because obviously there's only a finite number of subjects that they can study. Little explanation that these subjects, French, history, geography, and Spanish, are also here. So if your child wants to do all 4 of those subjects, French, geography, history, and Spanish, they can click French and history there, and then they'll find geography here and Spanish here. So they can do them all. It's not limiting them in any way, other than the fact that they have to do 2 of those subjects. So they choose 2 from the top box, 2 for the remaining box, and then we ask them to choose a reserve. And we occasionally get children who don't want to choose a reserve. I don't even know anymore if it'll let you submit the form without a reserve, so you may have to do this. You have our word, and again, hold me to this. We will not make any child do that reserve. In truth, the nature of the reserve is to give us an indication as to what other subjects children might be popular and that children might be interested in. It just enables us to understand where the growth subjects are. So it's as much for us as it is for the child. If we ever went back to a child and said, look, music doesn't work, we can't quite make it work on your timetable next year, and you chose design technology as your reserve, like, that child has every right to change their reserve. That's absolutely fine. So the reserve is really just providing us with the information that we need. These are the do's and don'ts. This is what we see every single year in school in terms of the don'ts, in truth. But the do's are obviously, they need to speak to people, they need to speak to you, they need to speak to us. I advised them last Wednesday, I think it was, in assembly, to start speaking to their teachers now, even though they hadn't had the options presentation. They needed to go into the lessons and demand from their art teacher an explanation of what art looked like, and demand from the music teacher an explanation of music. So they need to seek advice. They need to read those booklets. They don't have to read every page of it, but they really need to just spend a little bit of time reading through them. I always tell them to pick the subjects that they enjoy. They do not want to be sitting on a plastic chair for 5 hours a day, 25 hours a week for 300 days, however long the 350 days, doing subjects that they just don't enjoy. So they've got to find things that they enjoy, and hopefully if they enjoy it, they're also subjects that they're good at. Choose a broad range. So as I kind of indicated before, and to be fair, we do have a broad range of subjects, but there aren't many children who do computing and iMedia, for instance. They're probably a little bit too close to each other for it to be a sensible choice. If they want to, they can, and we're not going to say no, but just make sure that they're choosing a broad enough range that it doesn't pigeonhole them, because they'll have a sense of maybe what career they might want to do, but we all know they'll change their minds in many cases. And they need to have a think about that course structure. When is it assessed? Are there too many exams at the end of it? Might I do better if there's a coursework element? And these are the big don'ts. And we'll tell them every year, and some of them just won't listen. They just won't listen, and it drives us crackers in a funny way, in a comical way, because they come and see us with a smile on their face in September, all embarrassed, and say, I'm sorry, I know I've made bad choices. They should not conspire in a corner with the best mate to just pick exactly the same subjects because they think they've only got one friend on the planet, and they think that they're going to end up with that friend in those classes with them. It just won't happen. It just will not happen. So if they 2 children both choose history, we've got something like 8 or 9 history groups on a GCSE. The chances of them ending up in the same group are, well, it's a 1 in 8, 1 in 9 chance, isn't it? Same with the teacher. They may well have had that really dynamic, I'm going to do somebody else a disservice in a second, that really dynamic, exciting, passionate geography teacher in year 8 and they're thinking, I want him again, or I want her again. I want that person to teach me geography. But again, there's 8 geography teachers, and so there's a 1 in 8 chance, and they're going to have no choice over that. There won't be any flexibility. We won't be able to move them because of the limitations that are placed on them in terms of their other options. Don't leave it till the last minute. There's no rush. It's not first come, first serve. But equally, don't leave the thinking until the last minute. They can submit the form on the last day, as long as it's before the deadline. That's fine. But we don't want them to start only thinking about it on the 27th of March. And just moving to the final one. Although we allow some changes in September, we've spent so much time staffing these subjects and so much time building a timetable and so much time doing due diligence that if a child comes to us with a very kind of flippant reason in September for wanting to change their options, there is a chance that we will say no. Like we've taken you through this process. More often than not, there's a pretty decent reason. There's some substance to what they're saying, but if it's just that they haven't done the due diligence and they haven't thought about it and they did base it on the friend, and you see them, they walk into your office and they say, can I change my options? And behind them is the mate who they didn't end up in the same history group with. So they just need to make sure that they do the due diligence. Again, in the options booklet, they can get the advice there. That will lead them online in order to get the right information. Parents' evening, they can come along next week. They need to speak to other pupils who will give them a really honest view of what those subjects are about. If they know children in all the year groups or children who maybe are in sixth form at the moment, they need to speak to them, because they'll tell them very, very bluntly, no, don't do history. It's all about Nazi Germany, or it's all about the Russian Revolution. We'll have some career staff there next week, but I think even then it's a little bit early for some of them to be thinking in too much detail about the careers that they want to do. But we will be, as senior leaders, we'll be running interviews with each student over the next few weeks. Every year 9 student will get an interview from one of us, just to poke them a little bit with the thinking. No one's going to say, go for it, be a vet or be a lawyer or go into engineering, but we'll just prod them a little bit to make sure that they've started that process of thinking about careers and what might be a best fit for them. So the options form, they'll get it on Friday. It'll go out later this week. You've got year 9 options, parents' evening next week. We need that options form completing by March the 28th, and they must select a reserve. Little footnote there. I've always left this in, even though in recent years it's not really been applicable, probably because Mr. Williams writes the timetable and not me. There have been times when courses have had such low numbers that we haven't run them. The last time that happened was with textiles, and I'm going back a while now, 8-9 years ago probably, when there was only one child who chose textiles, GCSE textiles, and I was up all night worrying about how I was going to break the news to her that we couldn't run a textiles group with just one student. And I went to see her and said, I'm really sorry, we can't run GCSE textiles. Is it possible that you could choose something else? And she went, yeah, well, whatever, it's fine. So she wasn't that committed to it in the end anyway, but we've never run textiles since then because it had such low numbers. We usually get big numbers in every one of our subjects, but this does come with a caveat that if only one child chose computing, for instance, which isn't going to happen, or if only 2 children chose food, then it wouldn't be economically viable for us to run that. And we do occasionally get clashes where children choose a bizarre combination of subject that nobody else in the year group has chosen. Sometimes that's a little bit difficult for us to make work, but very rarely. So we may have to come back to them in those conversations in May and speak to them. Hopefully, I've done what we set out to do, and we've met those objectives. It is about 3 or 4 weeks of intensive support, making sure they get the right kind of guidance so that they can make the right choices. And as I say, we'll come back in April and May, have those conversations with them. But the vast majority of children will choose those options on March the 28th, and they'll get exactly the options that they take, because that's history tells us that we can make it work. Thank you for coming along. Thank you for listening. I've no idea what you've been able to see there. Hopefully you've been able to see the whole presentation, and hopefully if you've been able to put some questions in the chat, Mr. Williams has been able to respond to them and give you an answer. If not, then I'm there next week. Mr. Williams is there next week. There's a lot of senior leaders there next week. Year 9 is parenting is the one where we all come out in numbers and just make sure that we're available to you so that you can ask us the questions that you might need to ask. Okay, thank you very much. We'll leave the presentation open for another minute or two, just in case you've got questions. But thank you for joining us, and I will see you next week. Thank you.